Zoria Calder sold flowers outside the Wansiok building every day after school. 10 years old, invisible to the evening crowd, just another girl with a basket that nobody stopped for. Nobody knew she spoke Russian. Her mother, gone before Zoria was old enough to hold the memory steady, had been from a city far from here, had spent the quiet hours of Zoria's early childhood filling her daughter's ears with the language she missed most. Then she was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just Zoria and her grandmother Odetta, and rent that was always 3 days away from being late. So Zoria sold flowers and watched and listened. She had seen the building's owner exactly twice. Wansiok Kang, 30s, expensive coat, the kind of stillness that powerful men learn to wear like armor. He moved through the world as if the pavement had been laid specifically for him. He had never once looked at her. She was furniture to him. She was weather. His driver was different, Radomir Kyriev. Polite, quiet, always early. He held the car door. He nodded at the security staff. He smiled at Zoria once, the way adults smile at children they have already stopped seeing. He spoke Russian sometimes. On his phone, low and unhurried, standing just close enough to the building entrance that the wall gave him the privacy he thought he needed. He thought no one understood. Zoria understood every word. And at 5:43 on a Thursday evening, she heard him say something that made the flowers go cold in her hands. "Don't open until he's inside. One signal, that's all it takes." She looked at the black car idling at the curb. Looked at Radomir sliding his phone into his pocket, smoothing his jacket, checking his watch with the calm of a man whose plan was already running on schedule. Looked at the building entrance where Wansiok Kang would appear in exactly 15 minutes, the same time he appeared every single evening, because his life ran on precision the way a clock runs on tension. And right now, someone was using that precision against him. Her hands had started shaking before she realized it. 5:28 p.m. 15 minutes before. Wansiok Kang stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his top-floor office and looked at the city the way a man looks at something he has already won. 36 years old. Self-made in the way that required a specific willingness to do things others would not. He had built the system around him so precisely that deviation had become physically uncomfortable, not a preference, a reflex. Every evening, briefcase at 5:45, lobby at 5:50, car at 5:55, home by 6:20. Not approximately, exactly. His security chief, in Geombeek, appeared in the doorway. Sharp suit, no expression. A man who communicated professionalism as a form of currency. Tomorrow's arrangements, confirmed. Wansiok didn't look up from the window. Anything else? "No, sir." "Then we're done." Geom's jaw held the response he didn't give. He left. Wansiok appreciated that about him, the understanding that silence was the highest form of efficiency. He checked his watch. 5:29, 16 minutes. He gathered his briefcase and allowed himself exactly nothing in the way of feeling. Feeling was weather. You didn't fight it. You simply built structures that were not affected by it. He had no idea that 15 floors below, on the pavement, a 10-year-old girl was the only structure standing between him and the end of the evening. Back on the street, life ran at a different frequency. Zoria held up a stem to a woman in a gray coat. "Roses, ma'am, $2. The woman walked through her like she was smoke. She had been here since 3:30. Sold 5 flowers, $10. Enough for the rice and not enough for the light bill Odetta had folded into her apron pocket that morning without saying anything, because Odetta survived by not saying the things that couldn't be fixed yet. Zoria's feet hurt. Her shoulders hurt. The basket was still half full and the evening crowd was thinning, and somewhere behind her, 30 feet away, Radomir Kyriev was standing at the edge of the building's side entrance, checking his phone again, with the patience of a man waiting for something he was certain was going to happen. She was used to being invisible. She had never once thought it would be useful. But invisible meant you could stand 3 feet from a man who was coordinating something terrible, and he would not adjust a single word. Because in his mind, there was no one there worth adjusting for. Odetta Calder woke up at 5:15 every morning and was already tired by 5:16. Zoria knew this not because her grandmother said it. Odetta did not say things like that, but because of the way she moved through the kitchen. Slower on Thursdays, quieter when the first of the month was close. The sound of her chair scraping back from the table after breakfast was a different sound depending on how much was left in the account, and Zoria had learned to read it the way other children read weather. She was 10. She had been reading it for 2 years. The math of their life was not complicated, but it was relentless. 40 flowers in the basket on a good day. $2 each if someone was feeling generous. More often $1.50, and she smiled the same smile either way because a smile was free and attitude cost sales. 6 days a week, 3 hours minimum after school, longer on Fridays when the office crowd came through with loosened collars, and the mild guilt of people who had more than they needed and knew it. On a good week, she brought home 40, sometimes $50. Odetta's hands, stiff now at the knuckles from years of cleaning work she could no longer do full-time, made up the rest. The electric bill was $94. It had been $94 for 3 months. It felt permanent, the way certain problems begin to feel permanent, not because they cannot be solved, but because they have been present long enough to seem like walls. Zoria did not tell Odetta she knew about the bill. Odetta did not tell Zoria she was afraid. This was how they loved each other, by carrying the weight slightly out of the other's eyeline. 15 floors above the pavement, where Zoria counted stems and calculated margins, Hwanseok Kang operated according to a different kind of mathematics entirely. His schedule was not a preference, it was architecture. 5:45, briefcase. 5:50, lobby. 5:55, car. Every variable in his life had been reduced to a system, and every system had been tested until it held. He trusted what held. He had no use for what didn't. His office answered to him. His building answered to him. The city, in the ways that mattered, answered to him. He had built it this way deliberately, a life so precise that nothing unexpected could find a way in. He did not yet understand that precision, followed long enough, becomes a prediction, and predictions can be used against you. Zoria did not remember the day she learned Russian. That was the thing about it. There was no day. There was no lesson, no alphabet chart taped to a wall, no moment her mother sat across from her with a book and said, "Today we begin." It had arrived the way weather arrives, gradually, then completely, until she could not remember a time before it. Yevdokia Moiseva told stories in Russian the way some people hum without knowing they're doing it. In the evenings, after dinner, when the apartment got quiet and the streetlight outside their window came on like a signal, she would talk. Not to teach, just to remember. The words for snow. The words for the kind of loneliness that comes from being far from a place you were not even sure you missed. The word for the feeling when something is almost right but not quite. She said it once, and Zoria repeated it back, and Yevdokia had gone still for a moment, then smiled in a way that had nothing to do with happiness. She never explained why she had left Russia. She never explained why Zoria's father was a name and not a presence. She never explained the phone calls she took in the bathroom with the water running, or the way she sometimes looked out of windows for slightly too long, as if she was checking for something. What she explained was the language, without meaning to, by simply living inside it when the day got heavy enough that English felt like a coat that didn't quite fit. Zoria absorbed it the way children absorb everything that matters, not through effort, but through proximity and love. Then Yevdokia was gone, quickly and without a goodbye that made sense, in the way that some departures refuse to hold still long enough to be understood. Odetta did not talk about it in detail. Zoria learned not to ask. She carried the language instead, the way you carry something that belonged to someone you lost, carefully, and with the knowledge that you did not fully choose it, but it is yours now regardless. She had never thought of it as useful. It was just the part of her mother that had stayed. Russian was the sound of evenings that no longer existed. It was a woman who told stories to a child who was listening more carefully than either of them knew. It was, as it turned out, the most important thing Zoria owned. It started the way most dangerous things start, quietly and without announcement. Radomir Kyriev stepped away from the car at 5, 31, and moved to the narrow corridor of space between the building's side entrance and the steel pillar that anchored the awning above it. It was the kind of spot a person chose when they wanted the illusion of privacy in a public place, sheltered enough to feel contained, open enough that standing there looked like nothing. He checked the street once, left, right, the practiced survey of a man who had learned long ago to make caution look casual, then brought the phone to his ear. Zoria was 3 feet away. She was facing the street, basket in hand, watching a man in a brown jacket slow down and then not slow down, the familiar calculation of a potential sale dissolving into nothing. She did not turn toward Radomir. She had learned early that the fastest way to make a person self-conscious was to look at them, so she looked at the street and she listened. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of someone who was not nervous because they had done the preparation that makes nervousness unnecessary. He spoke in Russian. Confirmed for this evening. Same exit, same time. You know his pattern. A pause. The person on the other end said something she couldn't hear. Rear left. The mechanism is already in place. When the door opens, not before. The signal is one message. You'll know it when it comes. Another pause. He won't have time to understand what happened. That's the point. Then a sound that was almost a laugh, quiet and without warmth, the sound of a man who found competence satisfying in the way others found humor satisfying. He ended the call, slid the phone into his jacket, rolled his shoulders once, loosening something, and walked back to the car with the steady, unhurried steps of a man whose evening was proceeding exactly as planned. Zoria stood still. Around her, the pavement continued its evening business, heels on concrete, a taxi horn 2 blocks over, someone laughing near the building entrance. The city did not know that anything had shifted. It moved the way it always moved, indifferent and continuous. But Zoria knew what when the door opens meant. She knew what he won't have time to understand meant. She stood on a moving pavement, holding flowers and information in equal measure, and understood, with the particular clarity that fear sometimes brings, that the evening was no longer ordinary. It had not been ordinary for the last 40 seconds. It would not be ordinary again. She started with Radomir because he was closest, and because some part of her wanted to be wrong. She approached him the way she approached difficult sales, without directness, without anything that could be refused before it was fully offered. She stopped near the car, held up a stem, and smiled the smile that had nothing behind it except effort. "Roses, sir, $2. Radomir looked at her the way he had looked at her every evening for months, with the mild, reflexive kindness of someone who had long since stopped seeing her as a variable in anything. He shook his head, reached into his jacket pocket, and produced a folded bill without checking the denomination, and held it out, not unkindly. "Keep the flower," he said in English, his accent sitting underneath the words like a foundation. "Go home. It's getting late for you." She took the money. She did not take her eyes off his face. There was nothing there. No awareness, no adjustment, no flicker of a man who knew he had been overheard. He had already looked away, back to his phone, back to the particular focused patience of someone waiting for a signal. He had not considered her for a single second. That was its own kind of answer. She crossed to the building entrance. The woman at the front desk had a lanyard and the expression of someone who had been trained to be helpful in ways that did not actually require helping anyone. Zoria asked, as calmly as she could, whether she could speak to someone about the car outside, about something she had heard. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important." "I can take a message." The woman was already reaching for a notepad, already making the interaction into something manageable and closable. "Who is it regarding?" "Mr. Kang." The notepad stopped. The expression did not change, but the quality of it did solidified into something more deliberate. Mr. Kang doesn't receive messages from a pause that contained a full assessment of Zoria, her jacket, her basket, her shoes, walk-ins. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" There wasn't. They both understood that. She found her way to the elevator lobby before anyone stopped her, and she was almost relieved when Injeom Beek appeared. Because at least he was someone with authority, someone who might understand the weight of what she was carrying. He listened for 11 seconds. She counted. Then he placed a hand on her shoulder, steered her back toward the entrance with the impersonal efficiency of a man returning an object to its correct location, and held the door as she stepped back onto the pavement. No anger, no cruelty, no malice of any kind. Just the firm, seamless operation of a system that had never been built with her in mind, and therefore could not conceive of what she was bringing to its door. She stood on the pavement and counted what she had left. No access to the building, no one inside who had listened. Radomir 20 feet away, composed and waiting. The clock above the entrance reading 5:47. 8 minutes, maybe 9, before Wansiok Kang walked through those doors on schedule, the way he walked through them every evening, the way a man walks toward something when he has no reason yet to be afraid. 8 minutes, no remaining doors, no plan. The thought of Odetta arrived the way it always did when Zoria reached the edge of something suddenly, and with the full weight of everything the word meant. Her grandmother at the kitchen table with the light on, waiting. The specific silence of an apartment where someone is listening for footsteps on the stairs. Odetta did not ask for much. She had never once asked Zoria to be brave. She had only ever asked her to come home. Going home was the reasonable thing, the safe thing. She was 10 years old and she had tried, genuinely tried, and every adult she had approached had looked at her and made a decision about what she was worth before she had finished her first sentence. That was not her fault. She could walk away from this, and it would not be her fault. She picked up her basket. And then she stood there, not walking, her feet making a decision her mind was still debating. She thought about her mother. Not the absence of her, she lived with that every day, had learned to carry it the way you carry something that doesn't get lighter but becomes familiar. She thought about the specific quality of Yevdokia's quiet, the way she made hard things look like small things, the way she moved through difficulty without announcing it, without asking for acknowledgement, simply because the difficulty was there, and she was the one who had seen it. Zoria had not understood that when she was younger. She understood it now, standing on a pavement with a basket of unsold flowers and 8 minutes on a clock that did not care about her age. Her mother had never explained the phone calls, had never explained the careful way she moved through the world, always slightly alert, always measuring. But she had explained this without using words. You do not look away from a thing, because it is large. Zoria set the basket down against the wall. She did not leave. She moved to the building's exit, and she stood where he would have to pass her, and she waited. The doors opened at 5:55. She knew his walk before she saw his face, the particular rhythm of a man who has never once hurried, because hurrying would imply that something existed outside his control worth hurrying toward. Wansiok Kang came through the entrance with his briefcase in his left hand, and his attention already somewhere past the building, past the street, past everything immediately in front of him. Injom Beek followed 2 steps behind. A second guard peeled from the lobby and fell into position on the left. He walked straight toward her. She did not step aside. Every instinct she had built over 10 years of survival, be small, be easy, take up less space than you need, rose up in the same instant, and she set it down the same way she had set down the flower basket. Deliberately, with both hands. He was 4 steps away when he registered her. 3 steps away when he adjusted his path slightly, the unconscious rerouting of a man who had identified an obstacle. She moved with him. 2 steps. She was standing in the exact space his next step was intended to occupy, and she did not move, and he stopped because the alternative was walking through her. The irritation was immediate and total. Not loud, men like him didn't need volume. It was in the quality of his stillness, the way his eyes found her face with the focused displeasure of someone whose schedule had just been touched by something that had no business touching it. Move. One word, the full weight of everything he was behind it. Zoria opened her mouth and spoke Russian. Confirmed for this evening. Same exit, same time. You know his pattern. When the door opens, not before. He won't have time to understand what happened. She used Radomir's words, her mother's accent. The same low, unhurried cadence she had heard from 3 feet away, delivered back now into the evening air with the steadiness of someone who had spent the last 13 minutes being afraid, so that this moment could be something other than fear. The silence that followed was different from the silences she had collected all evening. Hwanseok Kang did not move. Something behind his eyes shifted, not softening, nothing so simple as that, but sharpening, recalibrating, the way a man looks when a situation has just reclassified itself entirely. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time. "Where did you hear that?" 3 words, quiet as a closed door. Everything changed on the other side of them. He asked her one more question. "The driver, you're certain?" And when she said yes, he was already moving. Not quickly. That was the thing she would remember later. He did not run, did not raise his voice, did not do any of the things she had imagined powerful men did when they discovered danger. He simply became a different kind of still, the stillness of absolute focus, and spoke 4 words to Injeom Beek in a tone that left no room for anything except compliance. "Lock it down, now." What followed was the building answering to the person it had been built to answer to. Injeom moved. The guards moved. Radio exchanges happened in clipped, operational shorthand. Within 90 seconds, the lobby entrance was closed. The car had 2 people standing at a careful distance from it, and Radomir Kyriev, who had made it less than 40 meters toward the corner, was flanked so smoothly and quickly that the evening crowd around him barely registered it had happened. He did not run. Perhaps he understood, in the moment of contact, that running would only confirm what was already known. Perhaps he was simply the kind of man who had planned for success so thoroughly that he had neglected to plan for this. The building's engineering team reached the car 11 minutes later. A controlled perimeter. A device confirmed in the rear left panel, exactly where Radomir's voice had placed it. "Rear left, when the door opens, send it." Zoria sat on a bench near the building's side entrance and watched the organized machinery of consequence moving around her. Someone had brought a blanket. She didn't know who, didn't see them do it, but at some point it was around her shoulders, and she was holding it closed with both hands without remembering reaching for it. She was not crying. She noticed this distantly as a fact about herself. She had expected to be crying by now. The bench shifted beside her. She looked up. Hwanseok Kang lowered himself onto the seat with the careful deliberateness of a man performing an action he had not performed in a long time, not sitting, but sitting here, at this level, next to a person like her. His briefcase was gone. His jacket had been replaced by something his security team had handed him. He looked, for the first time since she had seen him across the lobby that very first evening, like someone who was not entirely certain what came next. He sat beside her and said nothing for a moment. Then, "What is your name?" Not, "Thank you." Not, "How did you know?" Just that. The first question. The one that meant he was finally actually asking. The investigation took 4 days to reach the name, and 3 more for Hwanseok to decide what to do with it. Radomir's network unraveled the way these things unravel when the right pressure is applied to the right points, not dramatically, but thoroughly. Associates were identified. Communications were traced backward through the careful architecture of a plan that had taken months to construct and less than 2 hours to dismantle. The people who had funded it were located. Motives were confirmed. It was, his team told him, a clean operation on their end. Contained. Finished. Then one of his analysts placed a folder on his desk and said quietly that there was something else. A name had surfaced in Radomir's communication history. Not recent, buried, historical, the kind of connection that only appears when you pull a thread far enough back to reach the beginning. It had no direct bearing on the plot itself. It was context, background. The analyst used that word specifically. "Background," he said. "You may recognize it." Hwanseok opened the folder. Yevdokia Moiseva. He sat with the name for a long time before he read further. He had known her, not well, not in any way he had ever considered significant, in the period before his empire was an empire, when the edges of his world were rougher, and the people moving through it were not always moving through by choice. She had been careful and quiet and watchful in the way that people are watchful when they have learned that environments can change without warning. He had not known her story. He had not asked. That was a different version of him, operating by different rules, and he had filed that entire period away as closed. He had considered it resolved. What the folder told him was that Yevdokia Moiseva had spent years afterward in proximity to the outer edges of the network that had eventually produced Radomir Kyriev, not as a participant, as a person who knew things, who had, at some point, made choices about what to do with what she knew, who had, at some point, had a daughter. A daughter she had positioned, without explanation, on the pavement outside his building. Wansiak closed the folder and did not open it again that evening. He sat in his office in the specific silence of a man recalculating everything, not the threat, which was finished, but the shape of what had protected him from it, the chain of it. A woman he had not thought about in years, a language passed from mother to daughter in quiet evening hours, a 10-year-old girl standing in his path with his driver's words in her mouth. Not accidental, none of it accidental. He did not speak to anyone about it for a long time. He needed to understand first what he owed, and to whom, and whether those were even the right words for what he was feeling. He made the practical arrangements first because they were the part he knew how to do. An apartment in a building with working heat and a lock that held, and a neighborhood where Odetta could walk to the market without Zoria counting the minutes until she returned. A school that would meet Zoria where she actually was, not where her postcode suggested she should be. A trust, structured and protected, that would still be there when she was old enough to decide what she wanted to build with it. He made these arrangements with the same precision he applied to everything, and he did not mistake them for sufficient, because he was a man who understood the difference between a transaction and a debt, even when the transaction was large. The debt was not financial. He had understood that from the moment he had seen Yevdokia's name in the folder. What he sat with in the evenings, in the office, in the particular silence after his building had emptied, was the specific shape of his failure. He had built a life on reading situations accurately, threat assessment, pattern recognition, the ability to understand what something was before it fully revealed itself. He had trusted this about himself completely. And he had walked past the one person protecting him every evening for months without registering her as a person at all. Not because she was hidden, because she was small and poor and did not fit any of the categories his life had taught him to take seriously. He had built a comprehensive system for reading the world and had left an entire category of human being outside of it entirely, and it had nearly cost him everything. That was the reckoning, not the bomb, not Radomir himself. The changes came slowly, which meant they came honestly. His security structure was dismantled and rebuilt with different principles, not just different personnel, but different assumptions about where threats came from and who was allowed to be taken seriously. Beek remained, but the relationship between them shifted into something with more friction and more truth, the kind of professional honesty that is only possible after a shared failure has been acknowledged by both parties and neither has looked away from it. He showed up for Zoria the way he had never shown up for anyone, incrementally, imperfectly, with the specific discomfort of a man learning a skill he had always considered unnecessary. School events, occasional visits that he kept brief because he had not yet learned how to make them natural. The steady, unglamorous work of being where he said he would be. Zoria did not need him to be something he wasn't. She had Odetta for warmth, had her mother's language for courage, had her own particular quality of stillness that had always been sufficient. What she needed from him was simpler and harder, to be someone whose word held. He was learning what that required. It was taking longer than he expected. He did not stop. 1 year later, Zoria was learning calculus. Not because anyone had pushed her toward it, because she had asked, and for the first time in her life she was in a place where asking led somewhere. Her teacher had looked at her work for a long moment and then looked at her and said, simply, "Let's go further." Zoria had carried those 3 words home and not told anyone, just held them quietly the way she held most things that mattered. Odetta was asleep by 9 now, which was different from before. Before, she had stayed awake past midnight with the specific wakefulness of a woman running numbers she could not make add up. The chair no longer scraped back from the table the way it used to. The sound of the apartment in the mornings was easier. Zoria noticed this the way she had always noticed the things Odetta never said, carefully, and with the full weight of what it meant. The electric bill was paid. It had been paid for 11 consecutive months. It had stopped feeling temporary. Wansiak had a photograph on his desk. Not of the evening, not of the car, not of the confirmation, not of any of the machinery of what had been prevented. It was a photograph taken 3 months after, the day Zoria had appeared in his office doorway with the same quality of stillness she had carried on the pavement, unhurried, self-contained, taking up exactly as much space as she needed and not apologizing for any of it. She had come to thank him. He had understood, sitting across from her, that she was also doing something else, measuring whether he was going to be worth the gratitude. He had tried to be worth it. He was still trying. The photograph lived between the lamp and the window. He did not look at it consciously anymore. It had become part of the room, the way important things become part of rooms, present without demanding attention, doing their quiet work simply by being there. Yevdokia Moiseva had given her daughter Russian. That was the gift, the inheritance, the thing that outlasted everything else. But Zoria understood now, in the way that understanding arrives when you are old enough to hold it, that the language was never only Russian. It was the language of paying attention when the world has given you every reason to stop. Of staying when leaving is available and easier, and no one would blame you for choosing it. Of speaking, clearly, directly, into the face of a silence that has been specifically designed to outlast you, because the alternative is becoming part of what you know is wrong. Her mother had spoken it, without words her entire life. Zoria had heard every syllable. She carried it now the way she carried everything Yevdokia had left her, not as a burden, not as a monument, but as something active and present and entirely her own. A way of moving through the world. A way of deciding what mattered and then refusing to look away from it. The man who had once walked past her every evening without a single glance now understood something that no system he had ever built had been able to teach him. That the smallest voice in a room is not the least important one. That the person the world has decided not to see is sometimes the only one in the room telling the truth. He had learned it the way real things are learned, not from a principal. From a girl with a flower basket and her mother's language and 11 minutes left on a clock that did not care how small she was. Some lessons only arrive once. He had not wasted his.